Welcome to ChristiTutionalist Politics Podcast, aka CTP, in association with thelibertybeacon.com. And I am your host, Joseph M. Leonard, and that's Leonard. CTP is your no muss, no fuss, just me, you, and occasional guest type podcast. I really appreciate you tuning in. As Graham Norton would say, let's get on with the show.
Wow. Hello, everybody. Welcome to the show. Today, we're going to have Michael Mears talking about the Halloween. Nope, that's wrong episode.
Michael Mears.
We were supposed to have Mike Mears with us, but not Michael Mears, but he's got a church thing, as you can imagine, with all the lunacy going on around D.C. And if you know anything about Michigan politics of late, too, whole lot of craziness going on here, too. It's hard to get four people together, and I didn't want to push this off any further away from the actual faith engagement event, which actually took place on January 30th. I wanted to get this out as soon thereafter as possible. So, Drew I'm McKissick, right? No, McKiss. Oh, I'm screwing up your name, Drew. What?
McKissick.
Yes, that's like I've got it written down and I still can't get it right. And Rob Lowe. Oh, no, that's another episode too. Dr. Rob Steele.
Hello, Drew.
But two admissions before I go too far. I wanted to attend, was trying to plan to attend the faith engagement, but it didn't work out. So I didn't make it. So I will, like everyone here, be learning as we go myself. And the other admission is I don't script. I normally don't share things ahead with guests, but since there's multiple of us and I was expecting there might be four of us on it, I did share in advance some information and that we would be rotating through answers so we wouldn't mumble and fumble and stumble over each other. It wasn't about control. It was about trying to avoid chaos. But at any rate, let me first introduce Dr. Rob Steele, who will then introduce us to Drew. So where are you calling in from, Rob, and how's the weather?
Yeah, I'm right here, and Joe, Michigan right now specializes in chaos, of course. So I think chaos is absolutely fine. I'd be more comfortable with chaos, but I'm calling from my house in Superior Township. So I'm seeing the same basic weather that you are, and but I do have to head up north tonight, still up to the Traverse City area because I'm doing an event up there in Lenawee County. So looking forward to that as well.
And go ahead and
So as many of your listeners may not know, that I had sent out an email that went out to delegates. Actually, I think it went out to more than delegates. I think it went out to about 17,000 people. People that I've been in contact with in the past and so forth. Some of them political, some not. But it went out discussing what the RNC has been doing regarding faith engagement over the years. And so initially I'd asked Mike Mears to come on, and Mike was there at the beginning in 2013. But, even better, today we have Drew McKissick. So let me introduce Drew, who was there with the RNC faith efforts from the beginning, I think in 2013. And so Drew has been with the faith on the RNC and with the faith team since that time. But he's also been a very active member at the RNC all along since that time. And he's also the state chair of South Carolina. And of course, South Carolina, while we all know at the top tends to be fairly Republican, down below at some of the lower offices, it has tended to be Democrat still. And Drew has done an outstanding job as the chair in South Carolina, and they have really moved the Republican effort deeper down the ballot, and now many mayorships and other offices that were previously Democrat, Drew has helped orchestrate to take those over. And of
Yes.
course, right now, Drew is actually the RNC co-chair. And so every day when he wakes up, it could be the day he becomes the chair. He doesn't know. I mean, there could be.
Yeah,
We had a plane crash, right near our house in Naples, where we go sometimes, and literally 2 miles from our house. And it turned out an aside, which I'm good at. My daughter's boyfriend was literally one of the first cars on the scene in his video, and then he was on international news all night long from this plane crash that happened right there on I-75. But so Drew is our co-chair. He does a fantastic job. He's all over the country representing the RNC. And what's fantastic is, the co-chair is not required that they be a member of the RNC, but he is, and he's been a great member and a great state chair. So, that's a fantastic aspect of what Drew's done in addition to his faith stuff. So we can go ahead and move into the faith part of the RNC however you want, Joe.
Well, again, this is a Christian show for all Christians. I don't want to dwell specifically on the RNC aspect of it, but the faith engagement in general. Of course, we want to bring people over. I make no bones about, yes, I am a GOP delegate. I call myself a ChristiTutionalist by choice, a Republican by necessity. In my opinion, it's the only party where the values are reflected in the platform at all, at least at this time. Maybe some other lesser parties, but they don't really amount to anything. But again, this show is about Christians in whatever party. But first, Drew, is there some warmth you can send our way?
Well, I just got off a plane like at midnight last night coming back from Alaska. So I don't know how much warmth I still have in my bones right now. I was with them for the last 3 days, got back late last night in time to go to bed and get up and go to church this morning. So, but I'll say, and just, initially talking about, before we get into details, I guess, about faith engagement, I think a bigger point needs to be made. And I suspect that's part of what you do with your show. And that is, one, getting across to people the importance of what we have in this country in terms of the blessing of self-government. And I would say from a Christian point of view, then, because we've been blessed with that, then our obligation as Christians to actually participate in the government that we've been given here in this country. That's one thing. And then when you go further and you talk about the Republican Party itself, and I hear your point a minute ago, and I sympathize, or I resemble that remark, as someone would say, because it has been said before, I'm a Christian first, a conservative second, a Republican third. The political parties in and of themselves, Republican, Democrat, Libertarian, whatever the party might be, parties in and of themselves don't stand for anything. People stand for something. So at any given day, it's the people who are in any respective party who are going to define what that party stands for. So as a Christian conservative myself, I'm always looking to try to get other people, one, engaged in the civic process, and as I think makes sense, getting them, as many of it as possible, involved in one political party so they can have greater political clout. It's just a matter of simple arithmetic. I've considered myself for a long time to be a political evangelist, evangelizing the importance of actually getting involved in the civic process. And when you're talking about Christians, where are they? Well, they're in church. So then you've got the importance of getting those folks who are in church not to be involved in a specific political party, but one, just to engage in the civic process and vote their biblical values. If they do that, we're fine. That's it.
We're already dealing in that first question, the why, which I had made myself a note, guessing to not put words in your mouth, but you're already kind of expressing it. Like my calling to do ChristiTutionalist politics, it's indeed about getting people involved in the Judeo-Christian foundation and keeping our nation as that republic we were founded as, and return to the Bible in full context. Sure. Because a whole lot of people have caught up in the worldly bombardment and kind of gone away and lost a little bit of that biblical root and urge to vote biblically. So I think, Drew, you've kind of already answered that, but yeah, anything else you want to add regarding the specific why the faith and the engagement?
Well, again, and regardless of what particular politics you may be talking about, liberal, conservative, Republican, Democrat, Christian, secular, or whatever, we do have a process of self-government with elections. And, at the end of the day, there's a scoreboard. There's winners and there's losers. It is, in that sense, it's a zero-sum game when it comes to political power. You either win or you lose, and losers don't get to make policy. The guy and gal who lost, they don't get a call about what the tax rates ought to be, or whether CRT ought to be in the schools, or whether, we have transgender bathrooms, or, you name it, go down the list of things that, you and I probably wouldn't have took a bet on 8 years ago that we'd be talking about today. But unfortunately we are. I think a lot of what I would call the boundaries, or if you think of it like a highway, the ditches have been moved further and further to the left, so to speak. I mean, we're arguing about things today that were accepted generally, universally, if you will, in the country as being fundamental not that long ago. And when you start arguing over things that are fundamental, you start to argue about the actual, underpinnings of the country, of society, of the culture. And, as the Lord told us, we need folks to go and be salt and light. And that doesn't mean just, in and around your neighborhood and your friends, but that also means in the political sphere as well.
And as Reagan said, for us to be that shining city on the hill. Rob, you want to chime in with anything else there?
Well, I think he's hit on the broad aspect of faith and engagement with government, and of course that's a huge thing, and I'm sure we'll get into it a little bit more when we talk about the Faith Summit. But it's been a huge topic about how little evangelicals tend to participate and vote, and that's just a huge aspect of why the RNC on a political side is interested. But there are many other groups out there, Faith Votes with Mike Huckabee, and of course Ralph Reed, Faith and Freedom, and others. So we'll cover some of that as well, I'm sure.
Absolutely. And here's why I was half tongue-in-cheek about the weather. My next question is, why where it was? Now, Rob and I certainly understand you wouldn't want this in Detroit in January. So I would imagine part of the weather factored in why it was in Vegas. And when I knew of it in advance and was promoting it, I was tongue-in-cheek joking, where else is there more need of faith engagement than Sin City? But in all seriousness, there's a lot of rooms, a lot of convention space. The airfare from anywhere in the nation is relatively low. So I would imagine all that factored in. But yeah, mainly why, Drew?
Well, first off, the main reason was because the RNC was having one of its three meetings there. We do 3 meetings a year. That was our winter meeting. It was in Vegas. So we wanted to do this while we had RNC members in town, because we've got a very large faith engagement committee on the RNC with a lot of participation from members from around the country. And so they wanted to be able to be a part of this as well. And not to put too fine a point on it, but, Nevada is also a targeted state in this cycle. When it comes to the presidential election, that's important. There are a lot of pastors there that we wanted to be able to reach out to. So all those things just kind of, pointed in the same direction, which is fine. But, not the last of these that we'll be doing by no means. This was a way to begin to have initial conversations as we start to ramp up, for this election cycle. And, as Rob pointed out earlier, this is something that we first started back in 2013 when Reince Priebus was chairman of the party. And he appointed the first ever faith engagement director for the RNC. He's a good friend of mine named Chad Connolly, who actually preceded me as state chairman here in South Carolina. And I went to work with him as the Eastern faith engagement director for, basically everything east of the Mississippi, and did 2 political cycles there, the 14 cycle and the 16 cycle. And, working with doing outreach to pastors specifically. Pastors are they're multipliers. Those are leverage points. And so those are people who, you would think, generally speaking, you shouldn't have to convince that they need the people in their church to actually be involved in civics. But you should be surprised how many really don't focus on that. And I don't mean focus on it to the neglect of their church work or, the gospel by any means. But again, the point that I made about, the blessings that we have of self-government, and then we were given a government to participate in, and just with everything else we're given, we're going to be held to account one day as to what we do with what we've been given. And I think you can make an extra case for that when it comes for government. So therefore, the pastors have an obligation to talk to those folks sitting in the pews about their obligation to what they do with what the Lord's given us here in this country. And so what we do and did in those cycles was go around and do meetings. It could be anywhere from 3 pastors to 100 pastors. It depends on where you go. You do a small meeting, so you can get more together to do a big meeting later, and go around state to state, church group to church group, local Baptist associations, Pentecostal associations, etc., and work your way up to the larger group. You have to build relationships, and once you establish credibility with them and build the relationships, allow you to get in the room with fellow pastors and just talk about the importance of this. I'm not trying to get you to get everybody to turn out in a local Republican organizational meeting. I just need you to get more people in your church registered to vote and vote their values. If we do that, we are miles further down the road than we were.
I hear you entirely. Like, I don't just, one of the reasons why I started this show is that, like Rob touched on, 50 million-ish Americans, supposed Christians, right? Now, we all know not every Christian is really deep in their Bible. But if we can get those real Christians who are biblically rooted involved, there's no way we as a block can lose. But a lot of people, and why I came out with ChristiTutionalist Politics, the book, to go with the show, and I don't just push that. My friend Neil Mammon has a book called Jesus Was Involved in Politics. Why aren't you? Why isn't your church? Because there's a lot of people, indeed, think as a Christian, you're somehow supposed to be standoffish. No, we are called to be our brother's keeper. That means be involved, but that doesn't mean socialist, communist redistribution. Those are personal commandments, and our government is supposed to stay out of those things. But now you mentioned pastors. I was going to go into the guests next. I was going to start with David Barton, but since you keep mentioning pastors, Dave Welch, mention him and his group.
Not a great guy. Yeah, Dave's been involved for a long time. I think probably, I suspect, a little bit longer than I have. I first got involved in the late 80s. Dave, a little bit earlier than that. I've known him since probably, I guess, sometime in the 90s when I first met Dave, and him doing some of the work that he did politically. I mean, prior to my, becoming, a GOP elected official, I worked in organizations like Christian Coalition and other groups way back in the day in the 90s and so forth. Dave participated in a lot of that as well. And he's continued to stay in the fight, and he gets it, and he understands why it's important that pastors be a voice for participation.
Yeah, and his group name is officially what?
You're catching me cold right now. I can't remember.
How about you, Rob?
I'll check. No, I didn't know him, but man, did he do a great job, and he told some stories of his effectiveness in working through the churches and on a couple of different issues in Houston that was just really remarkable, and everybody really learned a lot when he was going into that stuff. It's
pastor something, but for those viewing on the behind the scenes video to this audio podcast, you can see I'm holding up my flyer from the event, and the name of his group is inconveniently cut off at the bottom of the print page, and I don't remember off the top of my head either. But I love Dave Bart. I mean, again, anyone more qualified to talk about our Judeo-Christian ethic foundations than him, I can't think of, right, Drew?
No, I couldn't either. I mean, Dave Barton has forgot more about Christian American history than I've ever learned. And by the way, I want to say, I'm pretty confident this is true, the largest private library in America of such documents that go all the way back, actually precede the founding of this country.
Him and Glenn Beck have put together a massive collection.
He has. And he knows it backwards, forwards, and sideways, and you quote it off the top of his head. And, which so much of which just makes, I would say, well, first off, makes you ashamed sometimes how little you do actually know about the Christian aspect of the founding of this country and the views of the people who did found this country and what they thought of in terms of the importance of having Christian people engaged in the government of this country and the things that they said along those lines, which obviously isn't taught in schools today, obviously isn't talked about in the media today, and all that's for a reason, and we understand that. So, but one of the things that we can't do is get mad at the other side for what they do. What we need to do is get mad at ourselves for what we don't do.
Oh, I hear you on that. And I don't want to go into every speaker that was there, but Rob, one of the other ones, and most in this audience will recognize Ralph Reed, formerly of Christian Coalition, now of Faith and Freedom. What did he bring to the table, Rob? As if we don't know, but...
Well, he's remarkable. And back on David Welch, he's the head of the Houston area pastor council. So they have a large organization there where the pastors meet and have become very, very effective in their social engagement down there in a variety of issues of interest.
And before we go any further, thoughts and prayers, of course, to the Houston area after that shooting. But I'm sorry, Rob, go on.
And then also on, David Barton, I have followed him since the 90s, and I actually have a set of videotapes, VHS tapes of David when, he and I both were dramatically younger. And he was talking more about the, same founding stuff, but his talk with us was remarkable, and we could talk about it some more. But Ralph Reed, I learned a few things about Ralph that I hadn't known, but he just did a fantastic job. I was not aware that he was a multi-term chair of the Georgia Republican Party, and so his involvement in intersection between the church and politics is remarkable, because his depth of knowledge on the political aspects of elections and the electorate and how things work that he knows just was tremendous. I mean, it was unbelievable, the information he has that he can then apply to the numbers and the issues that are important to people, voting their faith and activating those voters. And the numbers that he had regarding some of the political aspects of this and how President Trump did in the election among evangelicals and how much it increased between 2016 and 2020 were shocking. And so he spoke not only at the faith meeting, but then again to us in the RNC meeting, and was a guest speaker for the main dinner. Just did a tremendous job. But his organization is out there really working hard to activate evangelicals, because if you're voting your faith, you understand, we all say, don't we always say this is the most important election in history? We say that every time. But the guardrails, that used to be, we thought we were arguing about, how much welfare was going to be larger or smaller. But what's happening now is getting down to the foundations of our society, and the guardrails are getting thinner and thinner. And so every time we say that, it becomes it is more true. But now we're getting ready to break through some guardrails that have existed for hundreds of years, and once broken through, are going to be difficult to, climb back up over the cliff. And of course, a lot of people living their daily lives and trying to act out their faith and taking care of their kids and going back to practice and getting their paycheck and doing everything they can to survive inflation. They're not as familiar with the idea of the concerted effort around the world to collapse the United States and to take religion out of the marketplace in the United States. And it is an international effort. And so it's really time for us to focus on this activation and voting your faith. And there are many groups doing it, as we mentioned.
Absolutely.
Yeah, and I don't want to get into hyper partisanship again, but I don't want a Democrat Republican thing, but maybe more a bit left right, because indeed we see protection of freedom of religion from the right, and we see hostility of it from the left, the anti-Semitism now, the anti-Christian, the attack on family values from the left, which is not to say all Democrats are ultra-leftist ideologues. I'm not saying that again. I'm trying to steer clear of ultimate hyper-partisanship. But anyone who looks with open eyes and is indeed deeply rooted in their Bible in context, again, not taking render unto Caesar out of context, turning it into from it takes a village, which is a biblical tenet, meaning, yes, it takes me, it takes my friends here with me today, it takes my family, it takes my neighbors, the micro level, small letter community, or communism, if you must, not the Hitlery blown out of proportion. It takes your children as wards of the state village. There's a big difference. One is biblical, one is not.
Stay with us. We'll be right back.
Hi, my name is Ed Bondarenka, and I host Your American Heritage on Saturdays at 2 in the afternoon on this station. Your American Heritage is a show about the struggle we find ourselves in and how to react to it in the light of our biblical and American heritage. Listen to it while you're working around the house, the garage, cleaning the guns, walking the dog, driving, or just lazing around. Join me at 2 o'clock Saturdays here on Wham Radio, 1600 AM, 92.7 FM.
God bless America.
Well, as Rob pointed out, though, we do use that that phrase a lot, and this is the most important election in our lifetime. But I think, just to build on that for a minute, the fact is, as we have pointed out, the left has been working faster and harder to take this country further and faster to the left in every succeeding election cycle. So in that sense, every election does become more important than the last, because again, as I pointed out earlier, we're not arguing over things that are marginal anymore. We're arguing over things that are fundamental, foundational to society, culture, et cetera. And
the core of the family, is under assault these days.
And and one other thing that people need to understand, that politically, is the political system by and large responds to, let's call it, political market dynamics. So in other words, if people are not demanding something or agitating for something, then it usually does not happen. In other words, we can't. It's hard for Christians to get upset at a government that doesn't respond to things that they want if they're not actively engaged in demanding the things that they want. And part of that is at the ballot box. That's one thing that we need to be mindful of. And as you point out earlier, and it's exactly right, you have a huge percentage of Christian conservatives who are not registered to vote. You have a big percentage of those who are registered to vote who don't vote. And so, if just an extra, let's say 20%, those who are sitting on the sidelines actually got actively engaged in every election around this country, it'd be an earthquake, total earthquake. And especially when you talk about lower level races, usually we all live and breathe and swim in national media politics every day. We're all guilty of this. We know more about what's going on in Washington, D.C. than we do on our own local school board or city council or county council. But the dirty little secret is we can all have much more influence over a city council, a school board, or a county council than we ever could over a congressional race or a presidential race. It's not that we shouldn't participate in those other things. We should, but we neglect what's going on at the local level to our peril. And, I don't know if you notice, you get a tax bill, I'm sure, every year, and you see how much your school district spends, for your property taxes, or, you see how much that impacts children in the local community and what's going on in the local government. But the further thing is the election participation rates in those lower level races are much lower than presidential races and congressional races. You've got school board races in some cases where collective turnout can be less than 7 or 8% of total elected voters in the district. So a small group of organized folks who want to work hard and help candidates can actually have a huge impact at the local level. And
Absolutely. I made myself a note to go next. Parental rights. Again, back to it takes a village. That's another thing under assault. Your children belong to parents and the extended family, not the federal tyrannical wards of the state. But yet one side is supporting parental rights and the other tyrannical, top-down, one-size-fits-all. You must believe the way we dictate you to believe mentality. And as you said, more mama bears, as we've been coming to call them, are finally stepping up and getting involved, Rob, right, at the school board level.
Yeah, I mean, it was the, being a physician, I can tell you there weren't a lot of blessings in the whole COVID thing with collapse of organized medicine, taking payments from the government to push, certain points of view and everything that happened at the FDA and HHS. But the one silver lining was absolutely what people learned about what was truthfully going on in the public schools. And that has been a revolution in the school board situation, understanding how advanced this indoctrination was and what was going on and being hidden. I mean, even when my 25-year-old was in elementary school, they were bringing home, books that said, talking about, promoting being a vegetarian and so forth, on a chicken that says, I am not a nugget. Okay, I got it. But that's not what they're talking about now. I mean, it's a whole nother thing where they are literally stealing children's identity away from their parents and hiding it. And, and on the medical side, it's such a travesty. It's hard for me to convey how insane what is going on is when you need a permission slip to take a mole off somebody, but not for an abortion or to change their sex or start that process. It is remarkable beyond comprehension. And that all strikes at the foundation and the underpinnings of how our system works and where the guardrails are.
Oh, absolutely, Rob. I just recently wrote on the libertybeacon.com a piece, Bread and Circus, right? Focus on anything and everything as a deflection and distraction, the bread and circus from things that actually are affecting your life now. And like I say in my book, they're peddling, as I coin it, the new R's. It used to be reading, writing, arithmetic, history, science. No, there's no R in there, but our kids are so dumb nowadays, they don't know there isn't an R in that word. But the new R's are radicalism, raunch, perversion, and racism through CRT. Anything but the core principles that teach them to be able to live and think and do things for themselves. They just want, as Limbaugh used to say, churning out mind-numb robots, not how to think, but dictate from the top down what you will think. Drew? Yeah.
Part of your problem, or their problem, is people who think. I mean, literally, that's their problem, is people who think, because their ideas don't stand to criticism, critical thinking. So the last thing they need is more people who think critically and much less are steeped in core values, core traditional American values, which, we know tend to lead to people who think differently than they do. So they have worked diligently and successfully in a lot of places around this country to undermine and attack that. And we are seeing the fruits of that right now around the country. And, thankfully, in the Virginia school board elections, a little over a year ago, you saw people wake up. As Rob pointed out, you saw a lot of people wake up because of COVID and at-home learning. And then people are like, what in the heck, y'all, what they're teaching this in school? And they start to ask questions. And well, that's inconvenient. So when they show up at school board meetings and start asking questions, they start turning off the microphones or telling them to leave, or, whatever. We're going to arrest you now if you keep disrupting this meeting with real questions, so it's the last thing they need is people with critical thinking skills.
Yeah. And they don't teach them history, world, and especially our own, as I also go into in my book. You don't need to look at the failure of fascism and Marxism through Marx, Lenin, Mao, Che, Castro. You can look back to the Mayflower Commie Compact, the Commonwealth, where everyone collectively owned. No one had an incentive to do more than the next guy, and they almost all starved to death. So Bradford instituted what America became known for: free markets, private property, personal responsibility, individualism rather than collectivism. And as they say, the rest is history. We went on to thrive, or we could have completely died out if we'd have stayed down that macro communism. Again, micro communism as a community is fine if you choose to be part of that community, as opposed to being forced to be part of a community you don't want to be. Right, Rob?
Well, that story that you just related about how, the Mayflower group that landed was almost extinguished because of starvation, because of the tragedy of the commons, let's call it. And then their recovery once they became responsible for themselves. That whole story was in great detail taught to children in their middle school class.
Not anymore.
Early 1900s. And so it just shows you how far. And once, the progressives got a hold of the education, understanding, as they say, give me your children for 2 generations, that kind of stuff. And so they did. And that's what's happened. And that was common knowledge among people growing up because it was in the public schools and in their Duffy Reader type texts. And once you start taking that away, it only takes a generation or two, and those people have no idea about those general principles. And that's why the whole faith vote thing is really not that partisan. It may end up there, but if people vote their faith, they tend to vote for the things that Republicans believe in, as you said, about parental rights and all these sorts of things. And what Drew said, they can't have thinking people. I just was moving a book out of my library, moving stuff around, and I had in my hand a book that I think the title of it was if liberals had a brain, they'd be Republicans, something like that. And it's kind of like that. And to be on the progressive team in today's society would be incredibly difficult because of this lack of the underpinning. They have to look at each issue separately, figure out how they come out on that. Whereas we tend to look at some very, very basic principle, liberty, freedom, some moral aspects, and we come to a conclusion based on those things, where they have to, well, how do I work that one out on this issue? Because it was the reverse on a different issue. It just becomes very, very difficult.
Yeah. Well, I'm with Dennis Prager on this. For years, I fell into the liberal conservative paradigm thing. And frankly, Dennis Prager educated me, and he's absolutely right. It's not liberal conservative, it's leftists. There's a difference between leftists and classical liberals. You look at a Brandon Strock or a Candace Owens or a Tammy Bruce or any number of people who were ultra liberal, but not completely indoctrinated leftists, that when you think in these terms, and that's true of some Christians, which is why I say come back to the whole Bible in full context. As I said, taxation, we all understand a certain degree of it is necessary. But Jesus said, God loves a cheerful giver, right? Taxation to some degree is necessary, but it is also true taxation is theft, that saying. God loves a cheerful giver. So we should be wanting to support the things our government, under the constitutional limitations, are doing. But redistribution, stealing from Steve to give to Eve for the benefit of John across the street, isn't charity. It isn't being our brother's keeper. It is communistic redistribution.
What we like to contribute to is things that actually make the society function better, like, say, for instance, national defense or local police protection, things that protect. When we go back to we talked earlier about fundamentals. Well, go back to our Declaration of Independence. We talk about what? Life, liberty, pursuit of happiness. Life, liberty, and actually, before they used the phrase pursuit of happiness, the word was originally going to be property. Life, liberty, and property. Protecting my life, my liberty, and my stuff, and to be able to use my stuff as I want to up until the point that it impacts you. So to be able to provide for, security and regulation to make sure that that's possible. Those are the things that, that's why you come together collectively as a society to actually protect and defend those things, as Jefferson laid out in the Declaration of Independence. But the principles you talked earlier, about the Pilgrims and so forth, whenever they changed tact, if you will, and decided, hey, maybe we need this collectivism stuff isn't working out the way we thought it was going to work, or we got people who are just willing to lay in the hammock while the other people are working. Well, what did they do? Essentially, they tacted towards a more Christian point of view, which is what? Personal responsibility, and the freedom to do with as you will. I mean, so freedom only works, as a good friend of mine says, freedom only works every time you try it. If you want, one of my favorite pictures you can find online, you can go and you can Google this right now, is the Korean Peninsula at night. And you can see right along the 38th parallel, everything below that at nighttime, you've got lights everywhere. You can tell people live there, and it's you have power, electricity, and above the 38th parallel up to the Chinese border is pitch black dark. Why? Very same area, very same people, same culture, same language, same everything except freedom or socialism. And there's a difference right there. Yeah. And if you go back to our fundamental Christian principles, beginning with personal accountability and responsibility, why would we not, we as Christians ought to want more of that in the political sphere, more people who have those beliefs in the political sphere, because then good things flow from that. And of course, we know leftists don't want that. So anytime that we talk about what we're talking about here today, which is getting more Christians to get engaged in the political system, they're going to say, no, separation of church and state, separation of church and state. Well, okay, so what you're saying is if I go to church, then I can't be involved in politics. Is that what you're telling me? Well, it kind of sounds like that's what they're telling people. But again, as I point out, I say this all the time, the people, of like mind who are just like us, but are very despondent sometimes and very worked up about what's going on in the country. We can't spend time being mad at what the other guys are doing. We need to be talking about what either we're doing or in many cases what we're not doing.
You're exactly right. That's why I wanted this episode on faith engagement. And also, I do point out in my book two things. One, about the Bradford colony. I like to think that's where Rand got the idea of Atlas Shrugged, because Atlas shrugged then and we changed course. But and now I'm forgetting the other point of what you said that I wanted to bring up. So Rob, take over while I try to remember what I forgot.
I think, one of the things that Ralph Reed talked about, was this tremendous number of evangelicals that voted for Donald Trump. And, and that was really confused the left or the liberals, because, nobody would argue that Donald in his personal life has, been the gold standard on certain aspects of the Christian life. But when it comes to what he tried to do to allow, the freedom of religion and to allow our system, our brilliant system, be able to function back the way it was designed, allowing people to have a better life. And so he was setting records for his election in 2016. But Drew, I think, did Ralph say that it was 11 million more in 2020 evangelicals voted for Trump?
It was. And in terms of total turnout, it was the second highest turnout in the history of the nation. Unfortunately, it had higher turnout in the other side, particularly in key states. But, states like California and other places where it doesn't matter if you can run up the score because the elected votes don't change. But yes, it was. And I would also say, the other thing, and this is the thing that, of course, just segueing into politics real quick, that has Democrats in this cycle particularly upset, is the support that he received in 20, and that he's built on, at least in terms of polls since then, with the African American community, the Hispanic American community, the Asian American community. He got the highest percentage of the vote in those three communities than any Republican since Richard Nixon in 1972.
Yeah. Oh, yeah. The left in their defund the police polls show 4 in 5 blacks want more police protection, not less.
And
so that ain't selling.
I'll say, and this is a good other point to make, is those communities, by and large, are more conservative than white American communities on key cultural values. And this is something that has the Democrat Party working at cross purposes with itself right now, and is beginning to see some of those foundations erode, because as they move further and further faster to the cultural left, they are alienating these folks who've been a core bedrock of their national support. And now you see those polls showing, Trump potentially having a larger percentage of those folks in the coming election. So they've got a big problem. And eventually, look, progressivism, we know, ultimately destroys anything it touches. And I would say in this case, including their own party.
Yeah, I made a note. I remembered what it was. Before I get to that, though, you went down another road, the election. People think of it as a great divide, but the reality is the election was decided by 44,000 votes over 5 states.
Sure.
That's what it electorally really came down to.
Sure.
And that difference is real easy to make up if people get off their couch and be involved, or at least vote. This notion that Christian means not being involved, which was my other point. The Jefferson letter, I mentioned that on the back of my book. That whole separation of church and state is not in our founding documents. It comes from and is bastardized out of a Jefferson letter. The left doesn't want a separation of church and state, where our founder said freedom of religion, but there shall be no official federal religion. But many states had their own official church way back when. It's not freedom from religion that the left is peddling. I like to say they want separation from church to state.
Well, that's why you have, and I think I'm remembering this correctly, but there is a leftist organization called the Freedom from Religion Foundation.
Exactly.
That's why.
Yeah, Rob, you want to chime in?
Yeah, right. Well, when I was in Las Vegas, we had to walk from one end of a complex to another to get to our meetings. And while I didn't run into any Danbury Baptist, while I was getting coffee, I'm standing there and I had my RNC credential on, and some guy, says to me, "So what's the meeting about?" And I said, Republican National Committee. And he was obviously a very bright guy. He talked for about 10 minutes. Turned out he was a professor who had then, gone into business, taught at and he was from Central America, and had taught at an HCBU where he was a professor. But he said, boy, he says, you guys are still missing a lot of, our community because there's such overlap. We had that exact conversation about the social values of a lot of the immigrant community who's come from Central America and South America, who are very religious, and these are the ones that the Dems are turning away left and right. And then, of course, when Drew mentions, the impact that or the inroads that we've made among the Black, Hispanic, and Asian communities because of the left's division tactics, that's something that we've been playing on, of course, on the political end with our community centers and so forth. But a lot of that comes down to religion, and it really is a sense of a community where some of our community centers, though they're started, frankly, as a political thing, they become true community centers. And these, communities like in Orange County, the Vietnamese communities use these community centers literally, teach their children their native dances and their native cooking, and their true community centers. And, the churches there have become a very important part of why, the Republicans have improved because of the engagement of the Asian churches.
And again, to avoid Democrat-Republican thing, this is where the ultra-left lies about the ultra-right. We are not anti-immigrant. We are pro-legal immigrant. And to your point about turning those away, they're turning people away from Venezuela and Cuba, where they actually qualify for asylum, and want all these other people in who don't have any of those values of actually escaping communism, because they have a whole point and different purpose. So the immigration is not no immigration, but legal and illegal. I want to start wrapping up. I don't want to go on and on and on forever. If it gets too long, people won't tune in. But I do want to go to this that I had written down in my notes, because I was on Wham Radio as a caller, Moment of Clarity show, Saturdays, 1:00, Wham Radio here in Ann Arbor, Michigan. I'm always calling into the Saturday show. Theron X.
Somewhere outside of Ann Arbor, Theron X.
Yeah.
But no, a funny name, Theron X.
Yeah. It was
Ed
Bondarenka and Bruce Fleury, who were filling in for Pastor Rick on his Moment of Clarity show. And they discussed, and I had to chime in, the Jesus Gets Us ads. Now, there's a whole lot of people that like it, and I get the point of anything that potentially brings people to church and the faith is a good thing. But I also understand the converse other side, my show all about the whole Bible in full context, not just the love one another part and leaving out the whole part of Jesus after he washed your feet would have said, go forth and sin no more. Oh, wait a minute. No. We can't have, you mean I got to self-reflect? You mean I got to confess? You mean not redemption, in order to get redemption, the word repent. You mean I got to consider repenting? Oh, no. I just want the all sandals and love part only. But you got to talk about the whole Bible. So your thoughts on that, Ed? Rob, we'll start with you this time.
Well, it still always comes back to, people just activating their faith to protect their family over time and into the future. That's why a lot of these organizations, asking people to vote their faith, they are nonpartisan. In these places like Faith Vote with Mike Huckabee, who he represents, and Ralph Freed, and Faith and Family, and some of these other ones, these are all nonpartisan education organizations, just to try people to say, hey, vote your faith, take care of your family, protect their future. And of course, on our team, we think, go ahead, because we know virtually all the time they agree with us. But it's all about, the foundational processes being carried forward to the future and giving the next generation the opportunity, to kind of the opportunity they handed us. I mean, it's just the maintenance.
As is my show. You've heard me a couple times say, I want to avoid the hyper-partisanship stuff and talk to Christians, no matter where they are, about coming back to the Bible, getting out of the world. If you go back to the full scriptures in full context, we fully believe they're going to vote one way rather than another, but they've got to go down and discover that journey for themselves. I'm not here to beat them over the head of you've got to vote one way or the other, though I do deal in left-right more than party, because I think the real world and these situations, to be biblical, forced me into addressing them, unfortunately, at times. Right, Drew?
Sure. Well, a former Bible teacher of mine said that most of the most well-known scripture is most well-known outside of its context rather than in its context.
Amen. Like Matthew 7. Like Matthew 7. There are 12 other scriptures about judging biblically. Sure. Matthew 7 really is condemn not lest ye be condemned. Just like it's not thou shalt not kill, original Latin, Hebrew, and Aramaic, thou shalt not murder. Right. There's a difference.
Well, in the context, you're talking about the ad to say that ran in the Super Bowl, and I know they've got this ad campaign nationally, and I get that, and I can see why people are, willing to kind of take, maybe what they can get, so to speak, when it comes to, something that looks like it's, supportive of Christianity. And I think, so in the campaign, basically, Jesus gets us. And yes, he does, because he's God. He understands us. He understands us.
He sent his only son to die for us.
And further, you have God in human form, meaning he understands because he experienced every potential frailty that we could have. So in that sense, yes, he does. But he also wants us to come to him. And as you point out, then that means something that most folks don't want to think about, which is, that means I get judged. And really, literally, at the bottom line, that's the problem that radical leftists, socialists, you fill in the blank here, have with anybody who has any core of a sort of core Christian belief to their worldview, is that there is an objective standard versus the subjective standard of man. There are only two standards out there. It's either the one you make up yourself or somebody makes up for you, or there is God's standard. And God has standards. And so as soon as you begin to talk about him having standards, then we'll suddenly...
no.
Might not be right or whatever. And I might be judged and I don't like that. So I'll go over here to this church where,
right.
As someone call it, the church of what's happening now. The I'm okay, you're okay church. They've got a lot of road, and they put a lot of people in the pews for a while, and people get, little or nothing out of it, sort of like cotton candy, and as you remind you of that scripture, and I forget if this was Paul or Peter talking about, heaping unto themselves teachers having itching ears. In other words, tell me something smooth, something easy, don't give me the hard stuff, that might affect my life in any way.
Right. They only want the lovey-dovey, touchy-feely Jesus. Cut out all that other inconvenient stuff.
That brings us kind of full circle here to the beginning of this conversation, in my opinion, and that is our personal accountability and responsibility for what we do with the self-government that God has blessed us with in this country. And to the extent that we don't do anything with it, we don't participate in it, we absolutely here on this earth get more to complain about. And it's one of the few guarantees in life that if you don't participate, you're probably going to have something more to complain about. But further, we have something we're going to be accountable for one day. And so folks sitting in churches, pastors who have people sitting in churches, talk about the accountability that we have for what we've been given. And then as a result of that, what should we do?
Amen. Amen. And I'm going to start to wrap this up. Rob, I'm going to start with you with the last question of, if you were to have me ask any question I had yet to ask, what would it be and the answer?
Well, it's mainly, people just getting information from themselves and focusing on what's going on in their own lives regarding their faith and morality and what they want to do for their family. And, somebody had mentioned earlier about, the basis of our society being the family, and that's absolutely true. And it's what I happen to be a son of the American Revolution and Union veteran. Sorry, Drew, Union veterans of the Civil War. And all the great wars. And, when I think about the sacrifices and the day my dad finished high school, going off to join the Navy and that kind of stuff. And I think about those things, and we're in our comfortable life here, ignoring this incredible history that has been handed to us. When we look at our society over time, I heard a very great historian say it's like a candle in a giant auditorium, and everybody's trying to blow it out. And we're that light and that candle of society trying to pass it on. And, the faith community has to be involved to help protect that and shield that flame and let it be carried forward.
Yeah, before you answer, Drew, I want to interject on another show where I brought someone on to talk Christian and secular movies, but mainly Christian movies. We got into that point here. I think bottom line we're still striving for. The question of the rapture came up. Christian sects believe it. Christian sects do not. That's the devil delving in to divide. We need to focus, right, Drew, on those things that we can draw together on, not the Protestant versus Lutheran versus Catholic versus what are those things biblically we indeed all can come together and agree on.
The most fundamental element of it to me is the fact that, it goes back to building on what I said a minute ago, and that is that there is an objective standard. Everything about, leftism that we experience in this country today, that we have experienced, the direction that they go is by virtue of there being a subjective standard in life. And that your rights come from man then and not God. If it's a subjective standard, we'll go back to our Declaration of Independence. Recognize that, that we're endowed by our Creator, not by Congress with certain inalienable rights, okay, or not even by a Constitution with any inalienable rights. So that's the first most fundamental thing, that everybody from a Catholic to a Lutheran to an Independent Baptist to a Presbyterian, a Pentecostal should be able to rally around. There's an objective standard of right and wrong. It proceeds not from us, it proceeds from God. And we can quibble about small details, but what the left is talking about now is not small details. We're talking fundamentals now. And I would further point out one last thing, and that is that what we are talking about here, and the things that I try to talk about with when it comes to faith engagement in general, is not about getting Christians involved in politics. And this is the way that the left usually phrases it. That's not what we're talking about here. I mean, everybody's not involved in politics. I am. This is what I do for a living, but I'm weird. This is the kind of thing I'm not my time.
I've heard that about you, Drew. You're weird. Yeah.
Rob here is a political junkie. He's been involved a long time. Everybody doesn't have time to be a political junkie. You've got lives. We understand that. We're not talking about Christians getting too involved in politics. We're talking about Christians engaging in the culture, engaging specifically in civics, in their government. At its root, simply being registered to vote and voting in every election. And when you vote your biblical values. That's it. Now that is the baseline to me of minimal acceptable behavior. That's the minimum we need. And if everybody did that, we would not be here right now talking about the need for this conversation. So starting out at that level, and then to whatever degree their interest may take them and they feel led by the Lord to get engaged in, maybe they need to run for school board one day or to run for something else, that's fine. Everybody doesn't need to do that by far. Maybe you need to help somebody do it. I mean, a lot of different things that you can do. You don't need to be a full-time political activist. You need just to do a little bit more than what you're doing right now. And that's the secret.
Yeah, and I think that's a good place that we can conclude. You brought up something we can all agree on. Drew is weird.
Well, something we won't be able to agree on, but I'll vote for Groundhog Day as the best religious movie.
Oh, all right. Thank you all for joining. Rob, Dr. Rob, thank you. And also, Drew, send us a pallet of hot chocolate. It's cold up here. Thank you all for tuning in. Again, I can never, things are so serious. We have to keep a sense of humor too.
Absolutely.
Correct? All right. Thank you all for tuning in. Take care. God bless all. Just wanted to give a brief shout out and thank you to all the folks on iHeartRadio and Player FM for being 2 in the top 3 platforms that my show, ChristiTutionalist Politics, is most often listened to. So thank you all. Take care. God bless.
Thank you for having tuned in for ChristiTutionalist Politics Show. If you haven't already, please check out my primary internationally available book, Terror Strikes, coming soon to a city near you. Available anywhere books are sold. If you have locally run bookstores still near you, they can order it for you, or autographed copies are available online direct from me via terrorstrikes.info/shop. Be sure to check out more about today's discussion at thelibertybeacon.com, where my articles drop every Saturday. And let me remind, over time, the fancy high production items will come. But for now, for starters, it's just you as a very appreciated listener by me. All substance, no fluff. No fancy high production intro or inserts, at least yet, just straight to key discussion points. A show that looks at a variety of topics, mostly politics, through a Christian U.S. constitutionalist lens. So again, thank you from the bottom of my heart. Take care. God bless. Like and subscribe to ChristiTutionalist Politics Podcast and share episodes. We need your help to grow the show.
It is a myth that terrorism stopped during COVID. Unfortunately, mainstream media opted to prioritize pandemic hysteria over promoting all news. Terrorism continues. Simply hoping that it doesn't affect you is not a strategy. The new book, Terror Strikes, coming soon to a city near you, featured on The Author Show, is now available in paperback from bookstores, online, or as an ebook exclusively through Amazon Kindle. Terror Strikes, coming soon to a city near you by Joseph M. Leonard. Order today.